Hello, my dear friends. You're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 1st of February of 2024. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Crimea, and first we're going to talk about the yesterday attempt to attack from the Ukrainian side this area with significant number of missiles. According to the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, the Ukrainians used in that attack up to 20 missiles, and all of them were shot down by the Russian air defense. Some of those missiles were shot down above the Black Sea. Another batch of those missiles, 3 to be more precise, were shot down somewhere above the Crimea. But that was not the only one attacked from Ukrainian side. Today we got details, but from the Ukrainian side of another attack, but using the Navy drones. And as a result of that attack, the Ukrainians managed to destroy Russian ship. The Ukrainians destroyed the ship, and we have lots of things to talk about. So on this video we can see that those attacks, they were not just one attack, there were few attacks. First the Ukrainians managed to stop the ship, and after that they basically destroyed the ship from different, let's say, from different sides. They were attacking, and at the end ship was destroyed and sank. So the question is, what was that? What was the purposes and the goals from the Ukrainian side? And first of all, you need to understand that to destroy the ship wasn't the first and primary target for the Ukrainians. This is maybe the secondary target for Ukraine, and I'll explain to you why. First of all, let's talk about the ship. What is the ship? What is this kind of ship? And when talking about the Russian fleet in the Black Sea, there are a lot of ships of this type. For these purposes, let's move to our area with ships, and this is Ivanovich. This is the ship that was destroyed as a result of Navy drone strikes. And the Russians have a significant number of ships with the same type. They have R-109 Ivanovich that was destroyed today, R-71, R-239, R-60, and furthermore, the Russians still have a lot of submarines. So this is not something like big or not something important that was destroyed. Obviously, every single ship is very important in the Black Sea, but when talking about the Russian side, obviously this is it's more heavier to suffer losses among the personnel, because according to documentation, this ship can use or can have up to 41 crew personnel in the crew. So this is of course the heaviest losses for the Russians, the personnel. And so you might say, so what was the first and the main reason of that attack? Of course, media attack, and that was a very powerful and huge media attack. But you might say, what is the purpose of the media attack? I'll tell you. To understand the purposes of that media attack, first we need to move to Kiev, and to understand what is happening in Ukraine, I'm talking about the situation with Zelensky and Zaluzhny. According to CNN, Zelensky said to announce dismissal of Ukraine's top commander within days as rift grows over war, source says. Furthermore, according to additional sources, the Ukrainians, the Zelensky and the situation, they are saying not about days but hours before Zelensky said to announce dismissal of Ukrainians of Zaluzhny. So maybe right now Zelensky is signing another order or another paper where he dismissing Zaluzhny. Maybe Zaluzhny is already dismissed, and let's say some personnel moves papers from one office to another. So of course, so what is the connection? The thing is that attack against the Russian ship in the Black Sea was completely prepared and conducted by another person by the name of Kirill Budanov, the head of main directorate of intelligence. This is Ukrainian, let's say MI6. I don't know. It's intelligence service, and he is one of the persons who might take position of Zaluzhny. According to information we have, there are two candidates for this role: Budanov himself and the head of Ukrainian infantry army Syrsky. And so that attack was completely prepared by him, and that was media attack, and that was something like promotion. Because at the beginning of this week, we got report that Budanov and Syrsky refused to take position of Zaluzhny, and we understand why, because soldiers in Ukraine, they respect Zaluzhny. They respect him very much, according to information at least we have. And it would be very difficult to accept new commander. Somebody from, not even from infantry, not from tank forces, somebody from, let's say, intelligence. It's completely different type of forces. And the soldiers on the ground might refuse to accept new commander like Budanov. So that's why the Ukrainians were planning and were delaying the day when they announce about dismissal until they complete this special operation. And now Budanov is a hero, because the soldiers on the ground knows that yes, he's a hero. He has lots of successful things in the past. He destroyed Crimean bridge. He shot down, I don't know, a significant number of maybe planes. He made a lot of attacks against the Russian authorities. He killed a lot of, I don't know, mayors and local authorities on the ground, on the territory that is under Russian control. He made a lot of things according to soldiers, and now he destroyed another ship. So that's why the Ukrainians will accept him, at least today, while they're like, why they're shocked and why the media victory is, why he's popular. So I expect that tomorrow Zaluzhny will be dismissed, because you can't announce about the new commander on Monday, because everybody will forget about the case with the ship and something like this. Another important thing that you need to understand when talking about the conflict between Zaluzhny, Zelensky, and Budanov and so on, to tell the truth, Ukraine doesn't need Zaluzhny anymore. You might say, why is that? Because, Zaluzhny is like Gerasimov, the head of Russian army, the head of general staff. It's a general of maneuvers, of attacks, of encirclements, of penetrations, of special operations, of Kharkiv offensive operations, of Avdiivka news operations, of Kherson offensive operations, of Mariupol, Tokmak penetration and getting the Azov Sea and something like this. So these are generals from a very, very big letter. The generals like old school Soviet generals, yes, and maybe very powerful NATO generals. But when talking about the latest Ukrainian doctrine, when they took a decision not to attack anywhere and to stay home, stay in Ukraine and just to defend themselves as long as possible, to secure, to protect the territory, and the main goal is not to give the Russians more territory, in this situation they don't need Zaluzhny. Because he doesn't respond to the reality. His skills, they don't need his skills. But when talking about defense, of course, now it's the best time. It's a star time, rock star time for Budanov, because he is the general of special operations. And if Ukrainians are going to go in defense, of course, the next stage of special military operation will go under the flag of terrorist attacks, of destroyed bridges, of crossing the border with sabotage groups, of destroying power plants on the territory of Russian Federation, maybe attacks against nuclear power plants, maybe more killed and assassinated important people of Russian authorities. This is the stage of the next special military operation, when Budanov will be in charge of Ukraine army, but the main focus will rely on two things: defense, and Syrsky is going to be responsible for defense as the deputy commander, as I understand, and Budanov as the head of Ukraine army, and the main focus will be just on the special operations. Assassinations, killing, terrorist attacks, destroying, not just on the territory of special military operation. We might see attacks against the Russian ships somewhere else in Africa, let's say, when talking about not ships but that's infrastructure, in Syria, in Iran, in the ocean, in the Red Sea, and many other places where this person can get and to attack the Russian infrastructure and the Russian property. So and he is the best for this role at this stage of the special military operation. This is my opinion. We'll see whether I'm right or wrong. Now let's move to the situation on the ground. We have few updates from Crimea, as we discussed in the previous video. We got updates that according to information we have on this video, we see the close combat between Russian soldiers and Ukrainian soldiers, and according to the author of this video, the Russians, when they met the Ukrainian forces, took a decision to retreat and withdraw. That many people are saying that we don't see Ukrainian soldiers on this video, so that's why we can't say that Ukrainians are here. Completely correct opinion, but there is one important thing. Let's take a look at this video. At this moment, for example, take a look at this soldier. He is running. Then he is, let's say, turning to the right, to the left. Maybe not this one, but pay attention to this is the first one. This is the second one. And take a look. He was shooting. He was shooting from one side to another. And obviously, if Russian soldiers were shooting with their guns and rifles in this area, obviously, I'm giving you 100% sure that those soldiers weren't attacking, let's say, Ivanovka with the rifles. They were attacking, or at least against just buildings. Obviously, they were attacking somebody, and those somebody were the Ukrainian soldiers. On this video, we can't see the Ukrainian soldiers, but the destination and direction of Russian rifle attacks means that they were attacking somebody, and very likely they were attacking the Ukrainian soldiers. For now, we're not going to change the map. We don't have enough of information, but we will keep our eyes here because maybe there's something interesting is happening there. When talking about Zaporozhye direction, we haven't received anything during the previous 24 hours, just few more FPV drone strikes from the Russian side against the fortifications of the Ukrainians on the south of Robotyne. Now we are moving further to Vremivka tactical bridgehead. We have interesting geolocation. According to information we have, let's take a look at this video. We see how the Russians were bombing these intersections of the tree lines. And this is very interesting because during the previous videos we were talking about the Russian attacks in this area, and as a result of Russian offensive they managed to establish control over the fields and territories to the north of Pryutina and a little bit to the east. And now we see that the Russians are bombing another intersection, which probably means that very soon the Russians will make another attempt to attack and will try to establish control over this tree line as well. So the next Russian goal, according to this geolocation, is to establish control over this territory and to get a little bit closer to the main Ukrainian positions in Staromayorskaya. Now we are moving to South Donetsk direction, and we have a lot of very interesting details and updates. As you can see, as we already discussed, we have updated the map, and we received the video of Russian attack on this area. The forces of 72nd Mechanized Brigade published the video on how they were trying to repel the Russian convoy attack with significant number of armored vehicles, tanks and personal carriers. And according to this video, lots of tanks and armored vehicles were damaged or even destroyed as a result of Ukrainian FPV drone strikes. But it didn't stop the Russians, of course. And if we geolocate every single strike and the Russian movements in this area, we can say that the Russians were moving something like this. They started their movements to the south of Solotka, then they turned to the west, started moving along this line, then they turned to the north, and through the fields they attacked this territory. So that was the Russian, let's say, progress. And obviously, if the Russians were able to move something like this, obviously that the territory along their way was already secured by the Russians during the previous phases. So that's why we have updated and adjusted the map, and we'll see what is going to be next. Another interesting things are coming from Novomikhailivka. After a very long operational pause that took place probably for maybe 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, the Russians renewed and restarted their bombings and attacking of the Ukrainian positions to the south of Novomikhailivka. Very likely, during the next few days, the Russians will conduct another offensive operation to the south with the purpose to enter the farms, the cemetery, and the barracks on the south. If you remember, during the few weeks ago, the Russians have already entered there, but after very fierce and heavy clashes, they were forced to step back. Why I'm saying that the Russians are going to move further to the north? The thing is that very interesting updates are coming from the northern part. Today, more reliable mappers, updated their maps showing additional Russian progress in this area. And now, according to pro-Ukrainian, pro-Russian, pro-neutral mappers, this territory is under complete Russian control, this one. Which means that the Russians established control over 3 strongholds to the northeast of Novomikhailivka, and they have chances and rights and whatever you want to attack Novomikhailivka from the north. Obviously, they're not going to do this tomorrow or the day after. First, they will try to move further to the west along this line, trying to establish control over additional tree lines, additional fortifications and strongholds in this area. And after they do this, from this perspective, from this angle, they will launch attack from the north. Of course, the Russians will launch attack from the east, because they have already made this in the past. And of course, the Russians will attack from the south. And very likely the Ukrainians will not be able to hold their defense, let's say, lines in this area, and they will be forced to step back. So all geolocations tell us that the Russians are about to complete the encirclement of Novomikhailivka, at least establishing the operational encirclement, and they want just to force the Ukrainians of 72nd Mechanized Brigade to retreat from this territory. This stronghold doesn't play any role in this operation, because this territory is important to protect and defend Pobeda from the southeast. When talking about Marinka, we have very interesting updates. On this video, for example, we can see how the Ukrainian FPV drones were bombing and attacking the Russian tanks and armored vehicles in this area, and this video was geolocated. This video confirms the Russian progress, and obviously the Russians during the previous days conducted another offensive operation in this direction, and as a result of that attack, they managed to establish control over additional strongholds and checkpoints in this area. So the Russians, according to that video, were managed to get this line. Somewhere here, the Russians abandoned their armored vehicles and tanks, and using infantry, they started movement, or were trying to move along these tree line. Obviously, the Russians were trying to move along these tree line, and the main purpose was to establish control over entire this territory. We don't have the information whether the Russians managed to do this or not, but very likely they managed, and we expect more updates from this stronghold and from Georgiev itself. So very huge and very significant progress of the Russians here. Now we are moving to Avdiivka. When talking about the situation in the ground, there is no change. There are no changes. Nothing we got from the southern part, neither from let's say the forest on the east. But very interesting updates are coming from Avdiivka itself. The Russians continue bombing and attacking the city, the stronghold, with everything they have. They control the situation. They destroy everything that arrives, and they try to leave this area. But this is not the most important. The most important updates from Avdiivka direction are coming from the main logistic hub that located between Pokrovsk and Mirnograd. Basically, these two cities are the main logistic hub of Ukrainian forces here, and they use this area to concentrate and keep reserves, to let's say to keep forces, to send reinforcements, to send reserves, to let's say just temporary positions, warehouses, and so on. Logistic hub, as we discussed. And today the Russians published the video. According to them, during this attack, the Ukrainians, another rail train arrived in this area with significant number of infantry, and they were trying to land the infantry here to unpack the trains, but the Russians discovered, and as a result of Iskander strike, that group of Ukrainians was completely destroyed. Furthermore, during the day we got another video, but not of let's say the strike, but the consequences of another strike in another part of Mirnograd. On this video we see the consequences of Tornado S strike against another temporary position of Ukraine, maybe somewhere at school, or maybe in library or town hall, I don't know. But this is also not the most important. The most important understanding of the situation comes to us if we increase the numbers of updates since the beginning of the month. If we increase the numbers of updates, you're gonna see how focused the Russians are in this area. During the previous months, we got significant number of details and updates about the strikes that took place in Mirnograd and Pokrovsk. That was another strike when the Ukrainians lost another building with soldiers. For example, here we can see another results of strike in Pokrovsk, another destroyed building, maybe, some even abandoned probably, but that was another Iskander strike. This picture probably shows the from better angle the situation there. If we move a little bit further to the north, we're gonna see another building that was destroyed somewhere on the 28th of January at 1:30 a.m. of the local time. A little bit to the north, we got another building that was destroyed as a result of Iskander strike. Here we see another building that was destroyed by Iskander. A little bit to the east, another building of Ukrainian forces. To the north, we have endless number of buildings that were destroyed as a result of Russian Iskander strikes. There is no Iskander strikes. There is Iskander rain above Mirnograd and Pokrovsk, the area of the main concentration of Ukrainian forces. The only bad piece of news from all these strikes, and we need to admit, this is Pokrovsk once again, the only bad piece of news about all those strikes is that there are still civilians. For example, on this video we can see a number of Ukrainian people who were walking between the buildings, between the ruins. You see, it's obviously this peace people, no military guys among them. So which means that Ukrainians are still there, that believe that the front line is so far and it's not time for evacuation. But we saw the number of strikes, the consequences of those strikes. So obviously it's time to run away from this territory, because obviously Pokrovsk and Mirnograd in the very near future is going to become a line of combat contact between Russian army and Ukrainian forces. Now we are moving further to Bogdanovka, Bakhmut, Artyomov's direction. We have interesting updates. The Russians continue storming Ukrainian positions on the 215.7 hill. We see significant number of FPV drone strikes, but yet no operation on the ground. Interesting details are coming from Ivanovska. We have the first geolocations from Kamerton Akhmat special forces, how they were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces in the western part of the village, and we see certain Russian focus. I don't know whether it's old or new video, but we see the focus. It's the most important. According to information we have, at least from Rybar and different reliable resources, the Russians have already entered the village, and so we see, and I believe that the next days we're going to receive more and more updates from this territory, and very likely the Russians are there. When talking about the northern flank, we see a significant number of geolocations. The Russians haven't managed to penetrate this defense belt. It's too heavy, it's too difficult. There are very powerful, strong belt, and the Russians still can't penetrate it. But very interesting geolocations are coming from the forest between Popovo Forest and Ivanovskaya. On this video, for example, we can see how the Russians were bombing this territory either with a Tosla tower system or multi-launch rocket systems like Grad. A little bit to the south, we can see another bombing of the territory with very heavy weapon as well. If we increase the numbers of updates, let's say for 2 days, starting from yesterday, we're gonna find another video in the same area how the Russians were bombing this territory with RBK 500 cluster rounds, cluster aviation bomb. So we see a certain Russian focus and very big interests of the Russian on this territory. So all these things tell us that maybe the Russians do have some plans, and maybe they want to attack this area to penetrate this defense belt and to cut this territory in 2 parts and to start offensive operation to the north of Ivanovska like this, and maybe to attack Popovo Forest from the south as well, because they can't penetrate this defense belt, and maybe now they try to use the southern road. Interesting updates are coming from Bogdanovka itself. The Ukrainian sources published the video how they were storming the Russian positions along this tree line. So that means that very likely the Ukrainians made few counterattacks, and maybe they forced the Russians to step back and to move further to the eastern part of Bogdanovka. Maybe the Russians changed their plans because it's too long to move here, and now they're changed their focus to the south. Maybe. Now we are moving further to Terny, to Belogorovka. Yeah, very interesting updates are coming from Belogorovka. The Russians continue clashes and offensive operation. If you increase the numbers of updates, we're going to receive significant number of updates. The talks and reports that the Russians established control over industrial area were just speculations. The Russians haven't managed to clear. We see that the Ukrainians control the industrial zone from the landfill, so no chances for now, but the Russians are bombing, attacking and storming these positions. And starting off today, we start receiving updates of Russian multi-launch rocket system bombings of the central part of Bogdanovka as well. On this video we see another bombing with multi-launch rocket system. The Russians destroyed another warehouse, and we see the secondary detonation. So the Russians are very serious about this area, and very likely they're not going to step back, at least for now, from this territory. They will fight till the last. The most important and interesting updates are coming from Terny, Liman, Yampolovka area. According to some resources, the Russians have already entered Tarskoye. So we don't have any geolocations, any updaters on map, but according to some sources, the Russians attacked somewhere here, and the main purpose is to cut the road 0528 and to cut this area in 2 parts to make separate Zarechno Tarskoye defense belt and Yampolovka Terny, the second one. So the Russians just want to cut somewhere here and then to handle with 2 front lines to footholds separately. When talking about this forest belt, this defense belt, most of the reliable mappers have already updated their maps showing the progress of the Russian forces, and according to the most reliable mappers that we can find, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish control over something like this. So they got additional advance in direction of Yampolovka and Terny. Of course, huge advance, obviously. And this is the most active and the most fast front line ever, and the Russians are not going to stop. They will keep moving, and soon with the same speed they're gonna reach and get this line, obviously. When talking about Krakhmalna-Tabaevka area, since the beginning of, let's say, this operation and establishing control over this territory, the Ukrainian sources published the video of FPV drone strikes against the Russian forces, which confirms the Russian presence here and Russian control. But it confirms as well that the Russians still haven't managed to enter this defense belt, and probably this territory is the situation like it's in the reality. When talking about Sinkovka, the Russians published the video how they continue bombing and attacking the northern part. This is a very interesting video. The Russians were using the distance demining equipment Ur-77 Zmei Gorynich, and as you can see, the Russians are trying to increase the line, the half encirclement possible area of attack to the village by demining, by different approaches, by different tactics. And according to information we have, the Russians continue advancing further to the west in the forest, and as a a result of offensive operation, they managed to establish control over additional 3 lines. The Ukrainians were forced to step back, yet we haven't received any geolocations, but we'll see what the mappers will tell about this. But very likely that this is the current progress of the Russians, and once again, they are trying to do the same. They tried to increase the area of half encirclement of Sinkovka to ease the offensive operation, because before that, the Russians were moving just along this road. Of course, this is a very short area, and we remember the losses that the Russians suffered there. In the final video, the Russians published the video how they managed to discover and to destroy the Western IRIS-T air defense system somewhere in the vicinity of Kharkiv. Not just the radar, also the Russians destroyed the launching system as a result of another Iskander strike. This is the strike. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.